On this week's episode of I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I get to interview Chris Williams, who's an internet marketing expert and founder of Aginto. That's Aginto, and it's here in Sarasota. But more importantly, he's got a heart of service. Chris serves as the board chair on the advisory board for Manatee County Salvation Army. So please join me as I have a discussion with Chris. Hey, I want to jump in real quick. Somebody asked me the other day, what does the Corley Company do? Well, we do three things for nonprofits. One, we facilitate meetings, yes, like board retreats, where we discuss governance and strategy with all the members of the board. Number two, advise CEOs and help them as they make decisions and implement actions to drive their mission. And then finally, we produce podcasts such as this one, but also for a number of nonprofits to help you get the word out, get your message out. So if you're interested in any of these services, please feel free to reach out to Michael at thecorleycompany.com. Now back to the podcast. On this week's episode of the I-501CU, the podcast for nonprofit board members, I get to interview Chris Williams, who is the board chair, and we're going to talk a little bit about that for Manatee County Salvation Army. But before we jump into that, Chris, tell the audience a little bit about yourself. Really interested how you formed Aginto, your agency, and then why you spend your time in the nonprofit space.
Yeah, sure. So glad to be here. Thanks for having me. I started Aginto in 2011. Back then, purely as mostly web dev, a little social media, I guess, at the time. Facebook was kind of on the scene, and so I just went business to business, selling websites. Hey, Mr. Jones, you don't have a website? I can build that for you. Or hey, Mr. Jones, aren't you using Facebook? Oh, let me help you with that. But tough times. I really didn't have anywhere to live. Really didn't have anywhere to, wasn't sure where dinner was going to come from. And so personally, when I started the business, there were a couple of days where I had to go eat at Salvation Army. And so when the business began to grow and, God's been good to me, the city's been good to me, so on and so forth. When the business began to grow, I had the opportunity to donate my time, not really donate my finances, right? Back then, that wasn't the asset that I had available to me, but my time. So I showed up at a Salvation Army and offered to, sign up to serve dinner. And back then, man, I was serving dinner at least once a week, sometimes more. And they would call and say, hey, we need somebody to work the food pantry, or hey, we need somebody to paint this fence. I'd say, all right, I'll be there, whatever I can do. And my business continued to grow. I continued to get busier and busier. And so my availability to run out and go do those things just started to diminish. It started to dwindle. And right around 2016, 2017, they said, hey, would you be interested in being on the board? Yeah, maybe, most of the board members were individuals with much success or prominent political positions, for example. I was none of those things. I had a budding business. But yeah, I'll take the challenge and been on the board ever since. Coming out of COVID, I remember the chair was stepping down, and the executive director, the Salvation Army, was like, you should be the chair. I thought she was joking. I audibly laughed, and and then thought about it and said, okay, another challenge. I'll take the challenge. Sure.
Wow. So let me jump in there, Chris. So why do you think they asked you that?
Certainly being a business owner, there's a lot of similarity. There's a lot of crossover in terms of managing people and holding people accountable and setting agendas and strategies and being organized and all that stuff. Right. But I think that with the understanding that most board positions are populated with people that have had business success or are in political positions of power, they don't have and they're great people, but they don't have the perspective that I do, as somebody who's been on the other side of the food line. So I think I brought a fresh perspective and some energy. And that's why they made the offer. Yeah.
Well, I think that's fantastic. The fact that you have that empathy and sympathy. You've been there, and now you're able to bring that to the board. A lot of boards I consult with always have a little bit of a gap sometimes in being able to really resonate with the beneficiaries, the clients, the customers, whatever you want to call them. So I'm sure you bring something really special to the discussion. Now, business leader, you've got a growing business, very busy. You're also on the board. How to talk from a leadership perspective on how being on a board, leading a board, helps you at Aginto, and that's Aginto for the listeners, and maybe even vice versa, how leading Aginto helps you over at the Salvation Army.
It's been both. It's been both ways. It's gone. When you're the chair of the board of an organization, you are dealing with, very similar to a business, you're dealing with different personalities, right? So you're managing, so to speak, different personalities, and you've got to find a way to engage those individuals and empower those individuals to pursue the task at hand. That might be something as small as forming a new initiative for the nonprofit. It could be something as small as just completing these tasks, right? But whether it's a business or a nonprofit, you got to figure out how to empower that individual to accomplish that, because I can tell you from experience, if you try to do it yourself, there's not enough time in the day, man.
Absolutely. So you engage the board members. Talk a little bit about that. Maybe let's get into a little more detail. How often do you speak with how many board members do y'all have? How often do you speak with them? Do you pick up the phone and call them?
Yeah.
Just talk a little bit about actually managing a board. I think people would appreciate that.
Yeah. So Salvation Army it's a smaller board. There's 12 of us. That's growing as well. We've had some people come on and some people move away and stuff like that. It's South Florida. So that's part of it. Yeah. Obviously we meet every month, and then I try to reach out either by, email, text, phone, with the members once a month. And then I have a few kind of trusted board members. I mean, they're all trusted, but just whom I'm really close with and I really appreciate, whom I'll reach out to more often. And those are the individuals that will be the first to know certain aspects or certain decisions that we need to make. 2 weeks, 10 days maybe before a board meeting, I'll reach out to a board member and say, hey, here's one of the things we're going to be talking about. If you could, prepare for that, bring some insights, that would be great, because I want their perspective as well. I'm not the end all be all. I want their perspective. And so that's usually how I'll play that. And that's more just based on bandwidth, man. If I could talk to board members every week, we'd be that much better, right? But bandwidth.
Yeah, I think that's a challenge everybody has, especially those that are working full-time. You have to be sensitive to that and sensitive to your other board members that are working full-time. What about the executive director, or I think you all call it area commander? Commanders, you've got plural. I think you have two, or maybe that's standard for the Salvation Army.
Yeah,
so your interaction there, can you just talk a little bit about that? How often do you speak with him or her, him and her, or how's that work?
Yeah, so it's both. Each command will have what we would consider an executive director, like somebody that's there, always at that location. And Julie's been with us for well before my time, a long time. And then the area command is a major, and that's usually a husband and wife. So two, and I'm on my third major. So every few years they may move them to a different command and move somebody else in. And of course that comes with different personalities and different priorities and things like that. So that's a whole nother rabbit hole, but, I'll meet with the major. I'll talk with the major. I would say periodically. That depends, obviously, at each board meeting, or each committee meeting that we have or whatever. But anytime there's something pressing going on, I've been fortunate that I've had majors that have reached out to me and given me a lot of notice. Hey, this is something that the mayor said to us today in a meeting. I wanted to make you aware so that you can tell the board. That gives me time to put my words together, and prepare. It's not just a surprise or whatever. So that's helpful. And then with the executive director, Julie and I meet monthly on the opposite weeks by week of the board meeting. So 2 weeks after or before a board meeting, we Zoom and just kind of catch up.
Okay. And has that always been that way? I mean, is that something that was set when you came into place, or?
Yeah, it hasn't always been that way. This is our first year doing it. Our fiscal year started in September. That's when we started it. And it's been really great because prior to that, I would get the agenda, I don't know, 3 or 4 days before they prepared the agenda. Now I prepare it based on just the things that I know, as well as what Julie and I talked about in our pre-meeting. And so not only am I aware of everything that's going on, or better aware, but I'm able to schedule and spend our time more wisely, right, at those meetings.
Very good. Very good governance. And so just curious, your meetings, do you have a philosophy how you approach a board meeting? You're running it, but do you just have you can talk a little bit about how you approach those meetings? Do you have specific objectives, time frames, interactions? How do you view it and approach it?
I try to I try to keep them within an hour.
Oh,
First and foremost, pretty much everybody on our board nowadays is a working individual, right? So I want to be respectful of their time, but I also want to make sure that everybody is engaged. So what I mean by that is I've got certain individuals who are from like financial industries, and they're going to engage when we're discussing the financial report. They're really going to give us their input. They might not have so much input on the golf tournament or, event planning or whatever. And that's okay. That gives me an opportunity to engage with the people who are really passionate about fundraising and event planning and things like that. But regardless, in each meeting, I want to make sure that every single board member has the opportunity to use their skills and their talents. That's the reason we have them on the board.
Yeah, very good. And I think that's important, and for people to remember that often let the leader speak last. Make sure you get input from everybody, and then speak last. And I'm sure you do that. So, business guy, you start this business, and you're a beneficiary of the nonprofit, but you get into this nonprofit space. From a leadership perspective, what has surprised you the most about the nonprofit space, and were there any misconceptions when you went into it?
That's a great question. I think the only thing that has surprised me, the only thing that's really surprised me is I had previous board experience. I'd been on one other nonprofit board, really well, high functioning board, as is ours. However, it was a local nonprofit, and so we were at that nonprofit. We were board of directors. Salvation Army, we're advisory board. And I did not quite realize that there was a difference there. It just was completely, a board is a board. That's kind of how I looked at it. So that was a bit surprising. And then second, Salvation Army is a global organization. So whereas at a local nonprofit, you make a decision and it happens. That's not the case with the Salvation Army. We make a decision, then it's got to go to Tampa. And they approve that, and then it's got to go to Atlanta, and they approve that, and then Atlanta has to notify Tampa, and Tampa has to notify us. It's this, process, and that was a little different. I had to get used to that.
a little slower than when you're running your business and you make a decision. Everybody goes, "Yes, sir, we're doing it."
So much slower. Yeah, when you're running a business, you can't look to your left. There's nobody to your left. You just boom, you make a decision. But, it's for the best, right? Like they've grown this global organization by doing these things. So there's a reason for it. I respect that. And I'm glad that those checks and balances are in place. But yeah, if you make a decision, you're like, all right, let's move. You got to wait.
Yeah. Yeah, sure you do. And I know that drives business leaders crazy who are on as a board member. So what do you fellow business leaders, what words of advice or thoughts do you have for them about joining a nonprofit board? Would you encourage them, and why?
Yeah, 100%. Whether joining a board or even just volunteering, I tell mentees all the time that if you're having success in a community, then it's your responsibility to give back to that community. And that is using an asset you have at your disposal, right? I mentioned earlier, like the asset I had at my disposal when my business began to grow wasn't necessarily financial. It was my time. Give of your time. If it's the other, well, give of your finances. That's okay too. Or maybe a combination of both. But I think that it's a responsibility for anybody that's having success to give back. When you join a nonprofit board, at that level, you can, even though I have to wait, for the process, you can affect change, like at a whole different level. That's not to belittle somebody that stands in the soup line and hands that's important as well, right? But you're able to at the 50,000 foot level really create impact on your community and real change. Plus, yeah, you're sitting around the table with other successful, whether business leaders or whatever it might be, other leaders that get to know who you are and get to see your heart for a passion or for a mission. And yeah, we'll refer you business. Absolutely. There's a business side to it. Absolutely.
Chris, I love that because we've done podcasts before on the professional development by joining a nonprofit board of directors. And one of the things we say, don't be selfish about it. Sometimes the networking opportunities are absolutely incredible. Certainly, you want to have passion for the mission. Certainly, you want to contribute, but you are immediately around the table with kind of the who's who.
That's right.
Some of the who's who in the community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I tell clients all the time, there's a social aspect to it as well. You can share that information. I sit down with business owners all the time and I say, hey, what type of volunteering you doing? They say, oh, I'm bored over here and I'm volunteering over there. But, I do that, because of my own religious beliefs or whatever. I don't want to boast or brag. And it's not boasting or bragging to share that on LinkedIn or something like that. You can shine light. You can share that you're giving to this organization or volunteering with that mission and shine light on that mission. Talk about why you believe in that mission. You're going to inspire somebody else who also has that same belief, but didn't know there was a way, for them to give back. You can do that by sharing those things on social media. And yeah, there's a business addition to it. Absolutely.
Sure. Oh, I like that. You've got the opportunity. Don't be so humble. Nobody knows what you're doing to contribute in the community because, and Chris, you just summed it up beautifully. It's not about you at that point. It could be somebody going, wow, I can do this. That's right. I can make a difference.
Absolutely.
Really like that. Yeah, really like that. So as we're starting to wind down, Chris, are there any thoughts, words of wisdom as you've been experiencing working on both an official governing board and then as an advisory board to your fellow colleagues out there? Any words of wisdom?
Just that if you want to be a true leader, it's whether business or on a board. It's 100% about serving. It's 100% about pouring into the people that you're working alongside. A lot of times I think when you get into a position, you think, oh, I'm the guy or I'm the gal, I'm the leader. That's not what leadership really is. It's pouring in and serving all those other individuals. And in turn, they're going to together, you're going to get the job done. But if you don't pour into them, if you give orders and expect them to be done and that's it, it's not going to work. You got to pour into others.
Oh, basic leadership 101 from Chris Williams. Chris, really, those are prophetic words, and I'm glad you shared those. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast today. Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Williams with Aginto. Any final words, Chris, as we adjourn?
Final words. Work like you're still, I tell people all the time, the amount of hours and the amount of energy I worked for when I was working for dinner, I still try to have that mentality. Keep working like you're working for dinner, keep doing right by people and the community, and God will reward you.
Chris, thank you very much. And thank you for joining us on the I-501C, the podcast for nonprofit board members.
Thanks for having me.
All right, now we just listened to Chris Williams. Now I have the pleasure of listening to Reed Corley and recapping with Reed. Reed, what did you think were the 3 key points in Chris's discussion?
So the first key point, Chris communicates with his board members, his advisory board members, at least once per month outside of the monthly board members, the monthly board meetings. So they are communicating pretty frequently.
Yeah, really good point. Number 2.
In each board meeting, Chris wants his board members to have the opportunity to be engaged by using their skills and their talents.
Yes, number 3, bring us home.
Do not be afraid to talk about your service to local nonprofit organizations or national nonprofit organizations. It's not boasting or bragging. You are shining a light on a mission that others might be interested in also helping.
And how appropriate for Chris to note that, since he's a communications expert, has a marketing agency called Aginto. So, Reed, thank you very much. Recapping with Reed, ladies and gentlemen, and we will I-50 and see you next week.